Steve, I'm showing you something via the power of the interweb. Do you recognise this fella?
Bit like me on a good day. Oh, you mean Judge Dredd? Judge Dredd, yes.
Wonderful. Came out in the 70s. And interestingly, the guy who started it was Spanish. He was actually from Barcelona. He died in 2018 and he was interviewed about the iconic look of Dredd, and he said a couple of things. What he saw in fascist Spain, and when he moved to Croydon, of all places, the punk era was in, so he got that iconic look. But he said the following: the main influences were, I was living in Franco's Spain, but I was also living in Mrs. Thatcher's England.
Very good. Very good. So we're going to have a little chat about Margaret, are we?
The divisive Mrs. Thatcher. Thatcher the milk snatcher.
Thatcher the milk snatcher. What a great term. It's a bit like for being Starmer the farmer harmer.
Well, if he's harming farmer, then you're into that, aren't you?
Hey, he's harming farmer, mate. He's harming farmer, or for being two-tier Kia.
Yeah. Wow.
There's some great names. It's good to know that there were some good names like that back in 1971, though, with Thatcher. Thatcher the milk snatcher.
They knew how to do satire back then.
Oh,
you remember
really did.
Spitting Images, don't you?
Oh, totally, yeah. I must admit, Spitting Image really did some fantastic work on the politicians of the day, didn't they? They really did. They did.
Do you remember the scene with Thatcher having a meal?
I can remember lots of Thatcher because her and Ronald Reagan, well, first of all, they were in a love fest, weren't they, to start with, in the Spitting Image puppetry, which was always quite a good crack.
There was this great one where she was having a restaurant meal with all the cabinet, and the guy came over and got out the meat, and he came over and said to Thatcher, he said, and what about the vegetables? And she looked at all the cabinet members and said, oh, they'll have the same.
Yes, well, as she said, if you want something said, ask a man, and if you want something done, ask a woman. You know, a formidable lady, like her or loathe her. She's one of those defining women. I mean, she's probably one of the most defining prime ministers that Britain's had in the 20th century, outside of war leaders like Churchill, I think.
She was the longest serving prime minister.
Yeah, that surprised me. I mean, I know she did 11 years in power, didn't she? So what, 79 through to 90? I thought that Tony Blair had pipped her, but did he only do 10?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, okay.
And she was the first female prime minister.
Yes, I know. That's quite intriguing because she was in no way a feminist.
No.
And the feminists hated her, which was fantastic. And she was interviewed in 1973 by the BBC, and she said, I don't think we will see a prime minister, a female or a woman prime minister in my lifetime, which was pretty cool.
So she was born 1925. She passed away in 2013, I believe. She's about 88. She was known as the Iron Lady. You just say the name, Thatcher, and our generation know exactly what we're talking about. Even outside of the UK, in the Commonwealth, she was known. So where do you begin with this lady? What defined her, do you think? Because in effect, it was the whole of the 80s. And Britain in 1980 was not the same country in 1990. No,
not at all. And Britain in the 1970s, when she started to come into politics, was a very different Britain to the 80s. Like super different. I can remember when growing up in the 70s and there being, I think it was Trafalgar Square, just totally overrun with rubbish, where everybody was on strike. That was in the 70s. That was before Thatcher came in. There was, the winters of discontent, the Labour Party who have been nightmare, the trade unions running riot, all sorts of things like that. And Britain was an absolute basket case. Total basket case. So it needed some sort of radical shake-up. There's no doubt about that. I don't think that they are expecting Margaret Thatcher.
No. Well, Britain was known as the sick man of Europe, which was an old saying that was said to the old Ottoman Empire before it collapsed at the time in the 1920s. And it was everything was breaking apart. Effectively, nothing was working. We had the 3-day week in which they used to cut off electricity. I remember sitting in the house with candles on.
Yep.
We became very militant. I think for myself, watching TV I always associated a thick Glaswegian accent with the militant shop stewards, because they all seem to come from that kind of the background of, or that all Welsh.
Yep.
So, yeah, unusual time. And of course, that gave birth to punk.
It did, didn't it? And a lot of the political, popular pop culture was very, very establishment orientated in terms of being against it, or being very political in its singing. I mean, I know we've talked on this before, haven't we? Where when we were growing up, a lot of the songs were very, very political, and this is the sort of era where all of this stuff came about. I think one of the things that fascinates me about this woman, and I met her some years ago, and she was quite a character, was the way that she slowly built her career. And she did it really steady and slowly. We all know that she was the grocer's daughter and that sort of thing, but she studied chemistry at Oxford, for goodness sake. She wasn't somebody who hadn't got a brain in her head.
No.
She did a lot of research before she was entering into politics. She trained as a barrister, specialising in tax law. And let's face it, anyone who can do anything in tax has got to be a genius, because because it's just a nightmare. And then, so it was 1959 that she became an MP.
Yes.
And she just slowly, incrementally built on that career pathway. And that's something which I always admire in somebody who is wanting to achieve something. Today we live in a world where people expect to come in as the general manager. They don't expect to come in as the apprentice pushing a mop around the floor. They expect to come in up here, and they're not prepared to work 10, 15, 20, 30 years to learn their craft, to learn their trade. And Thatcher did that, you know. She did that from 1959, and eventually she was elected to Parliament for Finchley, I believe it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
even though she was Grantham.
Yeah. And then she ended up sort of working in the shadow cabinet positions, number of shadow cabinet positions, so that by the time that she actually stepped into leadership of the Conservative Party by going up against, was it Edward Heath?
Oh, I didn't research that one. I wouldn't know that one.
I think it's Heath. I think it was Heath. Somebody can correct me. But anyway, by the time that she went up and took the leadership of the party from him, she was probably the most strongly educated and skilled politician in the House of Commons.
Yeah.
Just slowly. And so what that added to her was a sense of gravitas. She'd done all of the different departments. She knew how they were wired. She knew and so she could speak with this air of authority, which, again, when you look at that and mix that into her type of own character anyway, that was quite powerful. And she was a little woman.
Yeah, you just reminded me. I'm sure she practiced to change her voice. The voice in the 50s and 60s was much more higher clipped, and I think by the time she had got into the control of the Conservative Party, her voice register dropped, and I think that was willed to make her seem a lot more, I wouldn't say masculine, but a lot more powerful. She was definitely an interesting woman. She was very lucky as well, I think, because two factors played into the Conservatives coming into power. And it was that wonderful advertisement done by Saatchi and Saatchi about Labour's not working. And it was just a line of people waiting to get onto the dole, the UB40.
That's right, yeah.
And also, the culture at the time, I mean, she didn't come into power until 79. So in 77, when punk came out, this was not really about her. But this tells you a lot about the zeitgeist. And it's the lyrics of God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols. And you just have to read it, and it tells you what the era was like. God Save the Queen, the fascist regime, they made you a moron, a potential A-bomb. God Save the Queen, she's not a human being, and there's no future, and England's dreaming. Don't be told what you want, don't be told what you need. There's no future for you. Well, when she came in with those two things, and she came in on a wave, it was almost like a blue wave, she, by the end of it, had completely overturned that world, so that from about 85 until she brought in that terrible poll tax, Britain was on the up because of the yuppies. She brought in various free market things that really upset people at the time, but we were a lot richer, a lot wealthier. And I think she went from taking the old working class man who had always voted for Labour to making them almost voting for Conservative because she put more money in their pockets. Loads of money, if you remember him.
Yeah, loads of money. Yeah, or Harry Enfield, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Harry Enfield, yes.
And that was a real achievement.
Look, she turned things around, mate. Like I say, whether she turned things around for good or she turned things around for bad. I mean, this is what her sort of legacy became known to be, wasn't it? Her economic policies known to be Thatcherism. You're a Thatcherite if you followed those
Free
economic
market
policies. Yeah, deregulation, privatisation of public state-owned industries, that sort of thing. Really tying up the trade unions and restricting that power, and then promoting, individual entrepreneurship, individual enterprise, with the minimal amount of state control involved in that. She was a real free thinker in that regard. I mean, and obviously an out-and-out capitalist in terms of, let's see how we can make these things work. I think you're right, though. I think that the rot began to really set in for her with the poll tax. The poll tax just crippled people, absolutely crippled people. It was horrendous. It was a nightmare.
I think the problem that she faced is that she came in with quite a big mandate, but the signs were there of she could often do some missteps. I mean, there's this quotation she gave. I think it may have been outside of number 10 before she officially went in. They have that little photo of.
Yeah.
And she decided that, okay, she said, the British people have placed their trust in me. And then she quoted from St. Francis of Assisi, which really upset a lot of members of the church at the time. It said, where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth. Where there is doubt, may we bring faith. And where there is despair, may we bring hope. Now, that's all well and good, but you're then linking yourself to a portion of the community that's going to alienate a lot of others. And that really upset, funnily enough, in reverse. A lot of faith people said, why are you trying to co-opt us to support you? And that was a misstep, as was at the end, as you said, with the poll tax, because by then her own party had had enough of her and they literally ousted her.
Yeah.
She was in the car, weren't she, when she was driving off, and they called the tears.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in politics, right? Eventually they'll put the knife on you and stab you in the back. You one day you are the statue, the next you are the pigeon, type of thing. Or the other way around. One day you're the pigeon, the other day you're the statue. So, and that's just the way that it works. But I think for me, when I reflect back, because this is obviously the time that we joined up into the forces as well, the time of the Falklands. Now, when the Falklands kicked off in 1982, mate, there was nobody that would have been able, I don't think, at that time, to make the decisions that she flipping made and got on with the job as quickly as she did make. All of the senior military advisors said that what she was attempting to do wouldn't be possible. You can't do it. Yeah. You can't do it, she said. So she says, no, we're gonna get those little sleek grey warriors of death. We're going to send them down to the Falkland Islands, and we are going to reclaim those islands. And they went, no, you can't do that. And she pulled it off.
She was also desperate. It saved her politically.
Well, they came back straight into the House after that with almost like triple majority or something, didn't they?
Yeah.
Massive victory.
She was at political risk because she'd upset quite a few people already. This was 82. She'd been in from 79. So she was almost towards the latter part of the parliament that she was initially in, and she had to do something, and it was a gift. They never called it a war, it was a conflict. That's the typical ruse that desperate leaders do. I mean, look at what's happened in South Korea when this idiot decided to bring in martial law. He went from president to he saved himself from impeachment, didn't he, amazingly?
Yeah.
They're not going to get him out, but they'll try anything to keep in power, but it worked for her. Not for the people who died down there, but it worked for her.
No, and you know what? I also think it worked for the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy was on massive decline up to the Falklands, and that decline was halted. Yeah. With the Hermes and the Ark Royal and the aircraft carriers are all going to be ditched. They weren't going to do anything with them. and then we ended up with the illustrious, the invincible, all coming through. But what it did was, I think it put the handbrake on the collapse of the fleet any quicker, because the fleet really was going downhill. And then the recruitment came up, and I can remember at the time with the recruitment lines for the blooming armed services, all three of the armed services, the recruitment lines were all the way down the street for people wanting to join up, willing to fight for their country. And I'm doing the bunny ears inverted commas here, because obviously the Falkland Islands is a very long way away from Britain. That was really fascinating. And that stands in stark contrast to a poll that somebody told me about recently, that there were less than 30% of the British young people who would be willing to fight for Britain today if they were called up.
Yeah, there were definitely a sense of ennui. The Falklands came along and it actually jolted Britain because it had become complacent. There was a Cold War.
Yes,
and effectively, that they realised, because what was the embarrassment, and in fact, Thatcher swatted it down. I remember it. The Americans said, "Do you need any help?" They offered a couple of ships or whatever. So no, we don't need it. But we struggled. We literally lost quite a few ships, and we thought, well, this is against Argentina, which was then a collapsing state in its own right, the junta. Could you imagine going up against any Warsaw Pact nation that had a proper navy at the time? No. So it was a bit of a rude awakening.
Yep, it was. But it did wake the Royal Navy up, I think.
It did, yeah.
And,
lucky.
if it
had been a year later, we wouldn't have done it.
No, probably not. But there you go. It's everything sort of slots into its place, doesn't it? And everything seems to have its right time in history for whether that purpose is for good or whether that purpose is for bad. I think that she like so many of these other people of the past. I mean, we talked a little while ago about Adolf Hitler. Come the moment, come the individual, whether that is for good or whether that is for bad. There's something being worked out there, and you get these characters that sort of come to the surface at certain times in global history. We're going to see that again now, and just slightly digress from Thatcher. With what's going on in Syria, we will start to see the rise of somebody coming out of Syria who may be for good or for bad. Whatever he is, because it's most unlikely to be a female, whatever he is, he will have a significant part to play in the balance of power now in the Middle East, because that has now totally shifted.
Right now, and I think they're jumping in too quickly, some of the commentators are saying it's a real embarrassment for Putin because he propped up Assad and their soldiers got a bit of a thumping, a bit of overreach potentially, but we can link Thatcher to the Soviet Union because in a way, throughout the 80s, she redrew the geopolitical map. She kind of got the Western world to allow Russia to open up, which is why we saw Gorbachev, and what do they call it? They had a word, glasnost.
Glasnost and perestroika.
Which was the opening up of that old closed country. So in that way, she was the right person at that time. Completely.
Now, she was the lady who said to Mikhail Gorbachev, we can do business together. And that was the sort of pivot point, which she was able to then foster this dialogue and was instrumental in actually bringing the Cold War towards a close. And you've got to remember, she had a really good, close working relationship with Ronald Reagan.
Yes.
And Reagan, again, for good or for bad, whatever you think of him, he's the one who says, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall, And that's the way it was. And so you've got these two very powerful, enigmatic figures in the free world of the United States and with the old crumbling empire of Britain, led by Britain with Margaret Thatcher. And together they were able to bring something to the world stage, a statesmanship, a stateswomanship, a statespersonship, however you want to phrase it in this mental world we live, statecraft that we are sadly lacking today.
Yes, that's right. She's of that generation. But I think for all gravitas that she gained, and she did like the gravitas it gave her, on the world stage, she was so divisive as far as the British were concerned. She still causes anger. There's a great program from the 80s. It was The Strike. Alexei Sayle played a writer who was doing about the strike in Wales. And of course, it was a comedy, so it was written so that the people who was going to play Arthur Scargill was Al Pacino. So anyway, but that almost kind of made fun of a very long, drawn-out, bitter process. And I made a note here. Jo, my wife, she started nursing in 1984. And when she was doing a training in Hammersmith, they brought in new regulations to cut costs in hospitals. And she said they went from superb, world-class wound dressings to the most horrendous stuff. She said she opened them up. She said, I can't put this on patients because of cutting costs. So in a way, a free market economy gutted large portions of work for the miners, especially in Wales. And it was bitter. She would not listen. Was it the miners' strike in which she famously said, this lady's not for turning, or that may have been later? I can't remember.
Yeah, I know that. But I know what she said. I don't recall in what context she said it. The lady's not for turning.
Yeah, we previously said when we looked at the 80s, in the late 70s, despite all of the problems, there was a real sense of community in Britain. But that would almost gone by the 80s. There was this sense of greed. And it's not just the British. This was an American thing bounding back on us. Gordon Gekko, Wall Street. And it became, oh, sod everyone else. As long as I'm making money, Jack, I'm okay. And I don't think we could imagine that back in 1979.
No, I think you're right. I think as we trucked through the 80s and it became very much about me, gimme, yuppie, 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 you know, it's all about being young and upwardly mobile, what you can gather for yourself, how you can have the best life that you can have. And everybody sort of became an island. And that sense of community, absolutely. By the end of the 80s, I think that sense of community in certainly most large towns in the UK had been really heavily hit. You know, I can remember when we were kids growing up, and you'd have street parties at various times in the street, and you'd have flags out, and you'd have all sorts of sort of fun community events, community fetes, community this, community that. Now, there may well still be parts of the UK that do that quite regularly. I'm sure there must be. I know that over here where we are now in New Zealand, and particularly rural New Zealand, there is still a very big emphasis on community, which I love. It's fantastic. And it takes me back to my childhood because it's very reminiscent of how England used to be. And it would be really sad if the New Zealanders lost that. That would be really sad because we know what comes after it, right? We know, we've read the script. We know the way it works.
Well, we've seen it because we saw it in Britain.
We've seen it, of course, absolutely.
And I also think we've got to remind ourselves, and she may not have been unique here, but 84, there was an attempt on her life. They tried to bomb, was it the hotel?
Grand Hotel in Brighton. Mm.
So, and imagine if she'd have been killed. I think it gave her permission to become a bit out of control, so that another 4 or 5 years beyond that, they started to plot her, bringing her down. And I remember Ben Elton and all that on his Saturday Night Live. He would always give the impression that I think she had problems with some tendons in her hand, and he made out it's because it's turning into a claw, things like this. So like when you get a football manager, that they can go in all on a high, but then they soon lose the boot room. And that's what began to happen, didn't she? She started to lose respect from her own cohorts and cabinet members, and certainly the nation.
Yeah, that's right. And her party, like they do in politics, once they think the party's going to lose power, they will take decisive steps to stab you. Whether you're looking at ancient Rome or whether you're looking at 21st century politics and everything in between. Yep. Politics is a very fickle mistress, a bit like the ocean. She is a very fickle mistress. There is absolutely no doubt that Thatcher, once the riots that kicked off in sort of March 1990 and the consensus of the Conservative Party was that the majority of British voters just didn't want Thatcher around anymore. Well, she tendered a resignation in November 1990, and that was her done. Like you say, I recall that very well. That's a very important month and year for me for various reasons, and it was the ushering in of a new era and it actually paves the way, in my opinion, for the rise of the Labour Party, because the Labour Party was not electable. Just don't think it was electable. What her vision did was it enabled centrist lefties, so the centrist Labour Party like Blair, to actually harness some of her good stuff that they could agree with, which dragged them out of the fringes and much more into an electable state. And that's what we saw happen, didn't we, after Major got kicked out?
But we've also seen it with Starmer, because Britain is naturally right-leaning. It's naturally conservative. It's been majority conservative all our lives. There's just been these little islands of about, one or two parliaments at a time, where Labour have to come in and sort out the perpetual mess that they've left, because they tend to run out of money because they don't tax anyone. Or if they do tax people, it disappears. No one seems to know where all this money goes. Look at the PPE scandal. They literally got rid of billions, just like that. The country needs money, and then therefore Labour comes in and has to sort it out. And then they get the shtick because most people don't want to pay tax, so they always vote back in the Conservatives. I can understand why it happens. It's just this perpetual cycle, ever the case. It's been like that throughout history, not just in the UK. It's almost everywhere. But she exhausted everyone because she was there too long, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's something to be said for only having two terms like the Americans do. So you get 8 years at it all up, and that's it. And then you're going to have a change. So 4 years, 2 terms, 2 4-year terms, and then you're out. And I can see some value in that as the leader of the party, because let's face it, it's a big job. And if you are somebody who is susceptible to power, i.e. the wanting to grab power, once you have got power, you don't ever want to let it go.
Well, in some cases they don't, because they don't want to go to prison.
Yeah, of course, there is always that. And I guess when you have to trawl through the annals of political history, there are very few politicians that are squeaky clean. One of the things that you talked about was when they tried to blow her up in 1984 at Grand Hotel. That was again another very interesting time, and it did actually really. I mean, she was known as the Iron Lady before then. She was known as the Iron Lady when she was in the Shadow Cabinet. That's how the Soviets referred to her when she was in the Shadow Cabinet, let alone before she became Prime Minister. But what it did is it really sharpened the steel of her character, because she took no messing after that. She made it very clear what her expectations were for people to do in the military, and that was that. And again, rightly or wrongly, that's the decisions that she made. And she was somebody who's willing to make a decision and willing to make a call. One of the things that I've always enjoyed working with strong leaders is they are willing to make a decision and then for action to be carried out. Now, if in 100 years, 50 years, 10 years, that decision can be looked upon and said, well, that wasn't the best decision, and these are the outcomes of it, that's fine. At least somebody made a call, made a decision and said, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it, based on all the information that I've got available to me, based on everything that I know at this moment in time, I will make a decision. And one of the things that I find at the moment is too few people are willing to shoulder the responsibility of decision making. They want all of the perks of holding a position of leadership. They want the pay scale, they want the kudos, they want the cap doffing. What they don't want is to shoulder the responsibility of making a decision. And Thatcher made decisions.
But I also think she was lucky. She was in an era where there wasn't social media. There wasn't half the coverage that they get now. They can't hide anymore. For some reason, I just looked this up. You reminded of me when you're talking about the politicians tend to be in it for themselves. There was a thing from 1821. You probably know it. It's called The Goose and the Common. This is what it says. The law locks up the man or woman who steals the goose from off the common, but leaves the greater villain loose who steals the common from off the goose. The law demands that we atone when we take things we do not own, but leaves the lords and ladies fine who take things that are yours and mine. The poor and wretched don't escape if they conspire the law to break. This must be so, but they endure those who conspire to make the law. The law locks up the man or woman who steals the goose from off the common, and geese will still a common lack till they go and steal it back. And that, in a way, is a critique of the political system. And the miners would say exactly that. They took it from us.
And then what happens is the geese that take it back become the ones that then own the common, and the circle goes round again and again
Perpetual
and again
circle.
and again and
Absolutely.
again. There is, all men are equal, but some are more equal than others, right? And that seems to be the way it goes.
And animals, Animal Farm.
Animal Farm, yeah. So that's just the way that it goes, and we will always have a hierarchy, and we'll always have a power base, and anarchy will not work. There has to be some sort of social equity in certain things, but that doesn't mean to say that everybody has to have the same as everybody else. I don't believe that. I believe in a meritocracy. I think if you work hard and you get a bit of a rub of the green along with working hard, and you make yourself some money, good on you, well done you. If you work hard and you have an enjoyable job, but you never become anything more than just a normal everyday bloke or woman, well, good on you as well. You've done what you're here to do. You've served, you've given of yourself, and you can look yourself in the mirror. There will always be people that don't want to work. There'll always be people that would love to work and don't get the opportunities, because this is the real world. This is what we live in. And we're never going to get everything right, because we are imperfect people in an imperfect system. And so what you have to do is look at the system that we currently live in, constitutional monarchy, democratic freedoms, voting rights, and go, it's not bad. It's not bad. Yes, we're going to get a few for being dodgy boilers come up through the ranks occasionally, but all the time that we have this mechanism in place, we can get rid of them.
Yes, yeah, for now.
For now, yeah. And then when we can't get rid of them for now, that's when it all goes to hell. And you say, well, you've only got to look, as I said earlier, look at Syria.
Yeah, it's sad. And it's going to... This is the thing. People will only tolerate so much. And you get too many people who come in and they lose sight of that. They're in ivory towers. They think they're isolated. They read too much of their own publicity and they begin to believe it. But forget, there's a lot of people out there, and most of the people who make these mistakes never study history enough to think, am I doing the same?
But look at this, mate. She stepped out of politics 34 years ago. She died, 20 years ago? 11 years ago.
2016, yeah.
Yeah. Passed away, was it 2016 or 2013 she died?
Oh, hang on, I made a note. 2013, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, so what's that, 11 years ago now? We can still talk about this woman and go, man, she's had some effect. I wonder for how many generations the effect that she had, whether she'll be viewed as a transformative type of leader in Britain, or whether she'd be viewed as somebody who just exacerbated the inequality across the country. I personally think that she transformed Britain for the better. I don't think that she did it all right. I think that she made some horrible mistakes. But overall, I think that there is more pro than con. I met her out in the Middle East in 1988 when she came out to the Middle East, and she was a very interesting woman to speak to. She was very knowledgeable about what was going on. And I briefed her on some stuff out there, and it was very interesting to see how engaged she was. She wasn't stupid, mate. She wasn't a stupid woman, and she's probably one of the most influential leaders that we've had in modern history, for good or for bad, depending on which perspective you're going to look at it from. But that would be my view of her, I think.
I think my personal view is that you said, how long will people be talking about her? Well, look at, people are still talking about Napoleon, but not many. I think one thing we can take is that from the end of the Second World War until now, it's been 75 to 80 years. Only now people are starting to no longer pay attention. So you're talking, what's that, 3 generations potentially?
Probably, yep.
So 3 generations, probably we're talking about 2 generations from now. People won't be talking about her as much. She'll be a footnote in history. But the footnote's going to be quite large. Because you think of her achievements, the first female Prime Minister, as we said, the length that she did it. I think the only criticism I have of her is I agree, Britain at the end was far better. We had a lot more liquidity, a lot more pizzazz, a lot more belief that we could go forward. So then why all the riots? Because she overstepped the mark.
Totally overstepped.
She effectively, at that point, had served perhaps 2 years too long, and she thought she was untouchable because she'd been in so long, and she took her eye off the ball and the fact that people, even in her own party, had had enough. Was she great? Well, she was influential, but I don't think she was great, and the cost to some communities was too much. And we're not talking isolated communities in the foothills of Wales. We're talking huge swathes of the north and Wales and Leicestershire, the coal mines. And I think that, okay, eventually they would have died because the coal that was being brought out wasn't, well, it was good, but there wasn't enough of it. So pure economics would have ended it. But she decided, right, I'm almost going to end it overnight, and I'm going to confront them, and I'm going to pay any attention to the miners. And you can't do that as a politician. You're meant to serve everyone in the country. Go back to her words, discord. Well, she's the one who bloody sowed it in the end. So she was against her own words that she preached, and I'll say it's a preaching, outside of 10 Downing Street. And I think there's, quite rightly, a lot of people now will never forgive her for that.
You're right, a lot of people wouldn't, and I think a lot of people have got to understand what forgiveness is all about, because the longer that you don't forgive somebody, all it does is it eats away at you. It does have no effect on them. So I think that's a totally different ball game. And I think that every single politician makes promises that they don't keep across the board. And you can never please everybody all of the time. Even in the work that I do at the moment, I know that I'm going to put out something and I'm going to say something, and out of 100 people, there will be 75 that are really on board, there'll be 10 that are not quite so on board, and the rest will be absolutely hating everything that I'm saying and everything that I'm doing. You know what? Suck it up, buttercup. That's life. That's the way it goes. And we are never going to get anything right. So I like to work on things on the balance of everything. And overall, was she a force for good or for bad? And I would say that there is more in her favour than against her. But I completely agree with you around the way that she went around the complete deconstructing of some of our important communities in the United Kingdom. That is something that I absolutely hate. I'm like you. Well, yours bigger town than me, but I come from a very small rural town in England, and community was really big, and I'm big about community. So anybody that rips community apart, I have a problem with. So that would be where I would go, quack quack. Oops, don't like that. But there's so many other areas that when you sort of weigh it in those scales, I'd say, you know what, you're never going to be perfect, mate. You're never going to please everybody. But overall, I think you had a pretty good crack at it, and you made a good fist of it.
And the thing is, like, if you can be known throughout the world just by one name, you know you've done something to get remembered by.
The Iron Lady.
Or Thatcher.
Yeah. But the Iron Lady. You are known, Mark, as the Iron Fist, because people don't realise that that's who Marvel... Was it Marvel? Stan Lee, the Iron Fist, Kung Fu... That's modelled on you, wasn't it?
Keep that quiet. Don't tell anyone.
Okay, I won't. Okay, no one's listening. We're all right.
Yeah, good. All right, sir.
All right, mate.
Well, so Thatcher's done then. We've done that one.
We've done Thatcher. Good on you. You take care,
right,
mate. Catch you later. Bye.
Take care, mate.